Christy, Linda, Claudia, Cindy, Kate, and Naomi. One of the most famous supermodels in the world, Naomi Campbell broke barriers by being the first Black woman to be on the cover of numerous magazines in the early 90s and solidified herself as a legendary supermodel. Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Dion, and I have been having so much trouble with the lighting in this video. It's just whatever. And then I usually do a look to match the topic, but I don't know how to make myself look like Naomi Campbell, and I feel like I'm sort of giving FLDS. We're just gonna move on past it. Today we are going to talk about supermodel Naomi Campbell. I really want to do a little style spotlight on Naomi Campbell because she's such an icon in the fashion world and she's done a lot of good. I want to delve into the full depth of Naomi Campbell in this short little video. So if you like style spotlights on different celebrities and models and niche fashion aesthetics, definitely subscribe down below because I post videos every Thursday on how to thrift and incorporate trends and styles sustainably. So do that, and without further ado, let's get into it. Naomi Campbell was born in South London, May 22nd, 1970. Her mother, Valerie Morris, was a dancer who toured in Europe, and her father left very early on. The last name Campbell was from her mom's second marriage. Naomi started attending the Barbara Speake Stage School studying ballet. While attending school, she was scouted by a modeling agency while she was window shopping. Right before she turned 16, she appeared on the cover of British Elle. Fun fact, her first appearance was actually in Bob Marley's Is This Love music video. By the late 80s, Naomi Campbell was an international success and part of a model trio known as the Trinity, featuring Christy Turlington and Linda Evangelista. Despite being one of the most sought-after models in the world, she still experienced racism in the industry, notably from Dolce & Gabbana, and by being the first Black woman to grace the cover of French Vogue after a designer from YSL threatened to withdraw from the magazine completely if they did not put Naomi Campbell on the cover. She was also the first Black model to be on the cover of the September issue for American Vogue. The September issue is always the biggest, thickest issue of American Vogue. It's a huge deal. It's probably their most powerful, most bought, most sought after issue. So the fact that she was the first Black woman to be on the cover of the September issue is a really big deal. Other than being an international supermodel and just so pivotal in the 90s supermodel glam aesthetic and just an inspiration to Pinterest, TikTok, and Tumblr everywhere, Naomi Campbell was also a huge advocate and activist. Despite her status as the most famous Black model of her time, Campbell never earned the same volume of advertising assignments as her white colleagues, and she was not signed by a cosmetics company until as late as 1999. In 1991, she said, "I may be considered one of the top models in the world, but in no way do I make the same money as any of them." Throughout her career, Campbell has been outspoken against racial biases that exist in the fashion industry. In 1997, she stated, "There is prejudice. It is a problem, and I can't go along anymore with brushing it under the carpet. This business is about selling, and blonde and blue-eyed girls are what sells. The American president may be Black, but as a Black woman, I'm still an exception in this business. I've always worked harder to be treated equally." In 2013, Campbell joined fellow Black models Iman and Bethan Hardison in an advocacy group called Diversity Coalition. In an open letter to the governing bodies of Global Fashion Weeks, they named high-profile designers who used just one or no models of color in their 2013 shows, calling it a racist act. At an early age, I understood what it meant to be Black. You had to be twice as good. When I started out, I wasn't being booked for certain shows because of the color of my skin. Campbell's role as a mentor to the younger generation of talent is instantly identifiable. Naomi Campbell's closeness to these women is not coincidental. She made an intentional decision to stand up for diverse young talent and bridge structural gaps of representation in an industry largely lacking in equity and inclusion. Everyone is human, including Naomi Campbell, so of course she has some controversies. Typically in style spotlights, like with Lindsay Lohan or Winona Ryder, I only briefly touch on the controversies. I don't really like to dwell on them. If you want to go more into it, you can find that out for yourself. Google is free, but I will just touch on it because it is a part of her legacy, and it's connected to something I want to talk about later. Despite her success, Elite Model Management dropped her, which was her management company, because, quote, no amount of money or prestige could further justify the abuse to staff and clients. They did re-sign her like a few years later, but damn. She's also been convicted of assault charges, but did take anger management classes. She had a blood diamond scandal in the 90s. She did a lot of advocacy work with Nelson Mandela in South Africa, and something she was given a diamond that was linked to, it was a lot. Yeah, you can research that more if you want to. She did struggle with drugs and alcohol in the 90s and 2000s, and that is like an important aspect. In her YouTube series in 2019, she did say that she quit smoking, and so I believe that she has been clean, happy, healthy, sober for many years now, which is awesome. The last little controversy I want to touch on is the fact that she's been photographed with Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. I mentioned this in my Victoria's Secret video, but Jeffrey Epstein was very involved in Victoria's Secret. He was good friends with Les Wexner, which was the former CEO of Victoria's Secret, and he used his connections with Victoria's Secret to traffic young models or aspiring models to Epstein Island and to suffer abuse. So I don't know, and Naomi says she has no idea what was going on with Jeffrey Epstein, but I don't find it surprising that as a Victoria's Secret model herself, she, and just a famous model of the 90s, that she would have been invited to some of these places because Epstein was really permeating a lot of the similar places that models were also in. So I'm not blaming Naomi Campbell for anything. I'm just saying it's not surprising that her and Jeffrey Epstein crossed paths because he used the modeling industry to further his abuse. So despite all these controversies, Naomi still is a huge advocate for diversity and inclusion in the fashion world. In 2005, she started Fashion for Relief to raise funds for victims of Hurricane Katrina. And since then, Fashion for Relief has done shows in Paris, London, Milan, all over. And she also recently earned an honorary doctorate for her impact on global fashion, which is really cool. In February 2021, Naomi Campbell sent an open letter with Idris Elba and Vogue editor-in-chief Edward Enninful talking about Ghana's stance on gay rights and condemning it. And then in July 2021, she also condemned racist attacks for Black players on the English national football team. She went on Instagram saying that it was disgusting to read of the abuses and that football players were not encouraged to speak up against like racial attacks and racism within their teammates. In the same month, so also in July 2021, she wrote an open letter to former South African President Jacob Zuma condemning the riots and unrest that had broken out following his incarceration. So she really does use her voice and platform to like speak out against things that she finds bad, including gay rights and, racism and all of that. So I think that's really cool. I think that's really important when you have any sort of platform to always try to be using it to like help other people up that may not be able to help themselves or like have barriers to getting into the space that you want to. So I appreciate that Naomi Campbell, as a Black woman in the modeling industry, has really, really made it her mission to be sort of a mother and a mentor to other young Black models. There was a controversy that like Tyra Banks said that Naomi Campbell told Tyra Banks in one of Tyra Banks' like first shows she did with Naomi Campbell back in the 90s that like Naomi Campbell said like, "You'll never be me," blah, blah. And like she is sort of like, she is proud of her success. She is not humble about her success and shouldn't be. However, she can come off. She has she's made it very clear that she is an iconic supermodel. We'll say it that way. And so is it surprising? Am I surprised that maybe she said something like that to Tyra Banks? Maybe not, just because like she has a history of sort of saying things like that to other models. However, she is such an advocate for lifting other Black models up in the industry that there's another part of me that doesn't really buy it. And I think it sort of contributes to this narrative that Naomi Campbell is like an angry, catty, like clawing her way to the top kind of model. And with that, I want to talk about Naomi Campbell's legacy. Naomi Campbell's reputation of being a hothead often precedes her, but I can't help but think back to her years of addiction. Cocaine can cause major rage outbursts and was incredibly common in the 80s and 90s. Models have used cocaine to help stay thin and peppy for long work weeks, and coke was often readily available at parties that the supermodels of the 90s were invited to. We talked about this with the Rockstar Girlfriend. We talked about we a little bit talked about this in Messy French Girl, that this glamorization, and in the grunge video, that this glamorization of partying, alcohol, and drugs is dangerous, but it's also been prevalent for decades and almost centuries, some would argue. We often romanticize this era of fashion when supermodels reigned, but this was also the era where heroin chic became popular, and many blame the modeling and fashion industry for pushing this narrative in the 90s and 2000s. Part of how we now romanticize it on Tumblr and TikTok with the glitter and the cigarettes and the messy photography, this era has become an aesthetic. Kate Moss was called Cocaine Kate in the 90s, but she still got to remain like a doe-eyed British model who had a bit of a bad side, who dated Pete Doherty, etc. Whereas Naomi Campbell is remembered very differently. Even when researching this video, so many of the opening lines of the articles that I was reading started with like iconic hot-headed supermodel, iconic, like, you know, there'd always be like iconic and supermodel in it, but also something about her anger issues, where I feel like Kate Moss's reputation doesn't quite precede her that much, at least her bad reputation. Maybe I'm grasping at straws, but I feel like Kate and Naomi were so interconnected. They were friends. They were going to the same parties. They were doing the same things. And I feel like they are remembered quite differently, especially in this like 90s supermodel aesthetic. Addiction affects everyone differently, and it fundamentally changes who you are as a person. But we have to keep reminding ourselves that thinking something is so Lana Del Rey vinyl and aesthetic can have very real consequences. Naomi Campbell lived this aesthetic firsthand and is a pillar of the 90s supermodel zeitgeist, and has given us an insight into the underbelly of this culture we often lust after. In no way am I excusing abusive behavior. I do think judging a recovered addict on who they were in the throes of their addiction is a bit harsh. Naomi Campbell is like 52 now, and she's so much more than another like 90s supermodel or this like hot-headed hot girl. I think it really like the difference between how Kate Moss and Naomi Campbell are received, I think really shows that white girls, especially like white pretty girls, are sort of allowed to have their bad phase, their rebellious phase. White kids in general are allowed to be rebellious in their teens and 20s, but black children and black teens and black young adults all often get punished for doing that same sort of rebellious experimentation, and lives ruined, you know, by going to jail, having a record. The fact that Naomi Campbell is still sort of fighting this reputation, I do think is a little bit sad. Again, I'm not justifying abuses, but cocaine is a really addictive and an anger-inducing drug, and she was constantly being given it. It was free. She never had to buy drugs or anything. It was just like at parties. And that's really hard when everyone is pushing you to do drugs, and it's so common, it's so prevalent, people are glamorizing it, and then people sort of demonize you for doing that once the sun comes up. But when the sun goes down, it's okay. I don't know. The double standard is prevalent, I think. I believe it's important to remember that Naomi Campbell was breaking records on these magazines in the 80s and 90s, not even that long ago. That's how deeply racism resides in fashion. Naomi is the face of so many first black woman instances in the fashion world, and that was only 30-ish years ago. Like, she was breaking these barriers in 1996, the year I was born. Racism in fashion is so insidious, and we can't forget how recently things have only started to change and how much further we have to go. She mentioned in that quote earlier that like Obama is a black American president, but that doesn't mean racism is fixed in America. And I think when we have those tokenistic first black person to people, those like breaking barriers, people often think that marks the end of racism, but it only marks the beginning of reversing racism. If we think that everything has a butterfly effect, good and bad, hundreds of years of exclusion and racism is going to have a butterfly effect for hundreds of years after, even when we are taking the first steps to fix it. And so Naomi Campbell being the first black model to ... doesn't mean that racism in the modeling industry is over and that she broke the chains of racism in the modeling industry. It is only signifying the first step in reversing all the exclusion and racism that the modeling industry has perpetuated, but only the first step, not the end. And I feel like people confuse that when we do have powerful Black people breaking barriers, breaking through glass ceilings. We think that they are marking the end of racism, but in fact, they are only taking the first step into reversing the effects of centuries of racism. Do you see how far back we are? We have so much further to go, not just in the modeling industry, but in general. So shout out to Naomi Campbell for lifting up other Black models, using her platform to speak out against injustices around the world and really try to be an international advocate. I know this video wasn't so much on her style and how to get the look, but how do you get the Naomi Campbell look? I mean, designers are sending her garments and she's being styled and she's a beautiful model. So less about how to get Naomi's clothing, but more about celebrating this really powerful, incredible Black activist who also happens to be an incredible 90s supermodel. So if you like these sorts of videos on style spotlights and style definitely make sure to subscribe to my channel. I post videos every Thursday, and leave a comment down below who else you'd like me to cover. I absolutely love talking about fashion in a way that doesn't have to do with consumption and just kind of the commentary of fashion. Also follow me on TikTok and Instagram because I post content there almost every single day. And with that, have a happy day. Bye.